Awesome. Well, welcome everyone. On behalf of the Canadian Mentoring Partnership, I'm thrilled to have you here today for this exciting conversation. After our last few webinars on research, partnerships, technology, this one really brings it all home to how are we going to apply all of those pillars to strengthen the mentoring field in Canada and ensure that we can grow the number of mentors in relationships. So my name is Michael Jans, Director of Communications with Canadian Mentoring Partnership. I invite you to reach out to me after the webinar, michael.jans@mentoringcanada.ca. Just a little bit of housekeeping. Please feel free to say hello in the chat box. Let us know where you're from, what your role is. You'll be able to see and connect with others who are here today. We also have simultaneous French and English translation available. You should have been prompted for a language box, but feel free to toggle back and forth. And thank you for learning with us and being patient in this Zoom format. I know it's not the same as having a big table where we can gather and hash out these ideas together, but we thank you for your patience and your participation here. Véronique?
Thanks, Michael. Merci. Donc, la conversation aujourd'hui se déroulera principalement en anglais. Par contre, la traduction simultanée est offerte. Vous pouvez cliquer sur le petit globe en bas de votre écran et choisir la langue française si vous préférez écouter le webinaire en français. Il est aussi possible pour vous de poser vos questions dans le chat box, dans la place de clavardage en français, et puis nous ferons plaisir d'y répondre en français également. Donc, on vous remercie également de votre patience avec toutes ces questions technologiques. C'est un apprentissage pour nous tout autant que pour vous. Alors, on vous remercie grandement pour votre patience. Michael, back to you.
Thank you. Yeah, and especially big thank you to our Francophone speakers who have been listening and participating through our webinars as we try and endeavor to be a truly bilingual organization. So today we have a very exciting webinar. It's kind of split into three parts. First, we're going to talk a little bit about a collective impact case study. I'm going to share about my journey over the last 4 years at the Alberta Mentoring Partnership. Then we have Daniel Horgan, who's a specialist in mentor recruitment and all things mentoring from the United States. He's going to be sharing with us about recruitment. And then we're going to be going into the kind of the main event here. So informed by those two experiences, let's talk about the survey that we're doing to measure and map the capacity of adults to step up in Canada. What are their limits? What are their barriers? What are their fears? This is really an exciting market research opportunity that you're going to hear more about. So please stick around for it because we have a number of questions in Mentimeter that we really need to have your feedback on. So of course, we begin today by a treaty acknowledgement, by acknowledging that we are meeting on Indigenous land. As settlers, we're grateful for the opportunity to meet here and are thankful to all the generations of Indigenous peoples who have taken care of this land. As settlers, this recognition of the contributions and historic importance of Indigenous peoples must also be clearly and overtly connected to our collective commitment to make the promise and the challenge of truth and reconciliation real in our communities. So before I get started here, I just also want to thank all of you for joining us again. It's important that we know that we're in the middle of a global pandemic, that you might be here coming from a different place where you have different family stress or work stress. Many of our programs are challenged, and if you need to step in, step out, step back, that's okay. We'll make as much of our presentation available after the fact as we can. If you want to engage and contact us after the fact, that's okay. We're thankful for whatever commitment and participation that you can engage and provide. And it's an ongoing conversation and we want to work with you. So thank you for all that you do in your community. And if you need support, please reach out and let us know. So as I said, we have 4 domains, our 4 primary work areas, our research, technology, partnerships, and communication. And really our goal with communications is to be the tide that raises all of the boats across Canada in terms of youth mentoring. So our mission as the Canadian Mentoring Partnership is committed, our commitment is to expanding access to mentoring to help every young person fulfill their potential. Now, we take a fairly broad definition of mentoring. For example, one of our team members this weekend was on a webinar with the OEDC and they were talking about how mentoring is a key component of workplace innovation to foster positive learning environments in Canada. And when they were talking about high performance workplace practices, they were talking about mentoring as a component of that, and how that can help workers of all ages make greater use of numeracy, reading, technology, problem solving skills, etc. We're not just concerned about mentoring for the young adults. We're concerned about raising the profile of mentoring for those young people entering the workforce, people changing careers, and now more than ever with COVID, we believe that mentoring will be of even greater importance as part of our recovery strategy, not just economically, but also in social-emotional ways. So mentoring we define as the presence of a caring individual who provides support, advice, friendship, reinforcement, and constructive role modeling over time. So I encourage you, if something speaks to you during the webinar today, we're using the hashtag Power of Mentoring. You can find us on Instagram, Twitter, social media, and visit our URLs at the links provided. So Veronique, before we get started, I was hoping you could share a little bit more about the other 2 surveys that we're undertaking right now.
Yes, we want to gather all the information and really, we want to understand what the mentoring landscape looks like in Canada. That means asking all of the people involved in mentoring what they're thinking about it, what their experiences are. That starts with asking young people about their experiences with mentoring while they were growing up. So right now, our National Youth Mentoring Survey is live. You can find that survey at mentoringcanada.ca/state of mentoring. If you're 18 to 30, please complete the survey yourself. You'll have a chance to win one of our 6 amazing prizes. If you're a service provider and want to share the invitation to participate with youth in your community, please do so as well. Our goal is really to hear from as many young people as possible. And with everything that we do at CMP, we can't achieve it. We can't do it without you. So that's the first survey. The second one, which is even more relevant for you, and I really hope you'll take some time to answer that survey, is our survey of youth development and mentoring organizations, which is live now. And you only have a couple more days before our early bird incentive ends on May 29th. So I encourage you, if you offer mentoring programs and services, to go check out our survey. Tell us about your services, tell us about your program, so that we can have a very good understanding of what programs and services exist across Canada, and have an understanding of the strengths and the challenges that these programs are facing, so that we can all work together to leverage your strengths and help address your challenges. So there's also a chance to win a prize for your organization. If you complete the survey, you'll be entered into the draw to win one of 5 $1,000 prizes. And if you enter and complete the survey before May 29th, then you'll get 2 chances to win those prizes. Back to you, Michael.
Yeah, excellent. So as Veronique said, we have 3 surveys. You're going to hear about the 3rd one today, but we're asking the youth about their experiences with mentoring. We're asking the service providers about their challenges. And now we're going to be asking Canadians about what is your capacity to step up, become a mentor, and help raise the number of mentoring relationships in Canada. So jumping into the communications pillar, I just want to share with you a little bit about a case study with the Alberta Mentoring Partnership. Now, prior to coming to the Canadian Mentoring Partnership, I was at the Alberta Mentoring Partnership for 4 years. And so I'm not, I'm hoping that, because one of the components of the Canadian Mentoring Partnership grant application was we were going to be scaling the learnings from the Alberta Mentoring Partnership and others like the Ontario Mentoring Coalition or other successful collective impact strategies, and scaling it upwards and outwards in terms of across Canada. So I just want to share with you a little bit about the learnings I had on the front lines with the Alberta Mentoring Partnership. So the Alberta Mentoring Partnership, the AMP, is co-led by the Government of Alberta. There's 2 ministries there, Children's Services and Education, and also the Boys and Girls Clubs, Big Brothers, Big Sisters of Edmonton and area. That's a joint agency of, it's a joint of Boys and Girls Club and Big Brothers, Big Sisters. So the Alberta Mentoring Partnership has been in concept since 2002, when there was a roundtable about a collective impact strategy for mentoring, but really got started in 2008. Now the partnership consists of over 170 school and agency members, including government ministries, government-funded organizations, community youth-serving agencies, schools and school authorities, faith organizations, service clubs across Alberta. So those 170 range from the really big players like Big Brothers Big Sisters of Calgary, Boys and Girls Clubs, Big Brothers Big Sisters of Edmonton, the ones with thousands of members, down to small and local clubs out of churches, out of schools, out of community centers. There's different cultural organizations that are starting their own mentoring programs, and all of them have access to the resources of the Alberta Mentoring Partnership because they're all a part of the coalition. So it's kind of it's a no-fee organization, and your buy-in is through your in-kind contributions. You can take what you need, but also you're expected to contribute later if maybe there's a resource development on youth and care or cultural mentoring or Indigenous mentoring or something that you have expertise to. You're expected to help review, contribute, participate. There were also training opportunities such as learning days and opportunities to bring the mentoring community together to gather around and raise the tide and the quality of mentoring in Alberta. So it really was collective impact in action, and no more so than when it came to recruiting and talking about campaigns about getting more people to mentor. And I'll talk about that for a little bit. So AMP focused on mentoring in schools, helping develop job-ready skills, increasing awareness about the importance of mentoring across the province, reducing barriers to potential mentors becoming involved, building the capacity of small mentoring programs to operate efficiently and effectively. Because remember, many of the mentoring programs in Alberta are not part of an umbrella like Big Brothers Big Sisters of Canada or another national organization like the YMCA. So they depend on expertise, tools, training, resources to come from some other space that they wish to use. So one of the products that the AMP made was an online mentor training that could be used by anyone in Alberta. And it was a great way to establish a quality mentoring baseline for folks to take advantage of. So getting into recruitment a little bit more. So part of the AMP's goal was to raise the number of mentors in Alberta. So they did that through basically three components. One was campaigns. There was a couple of different campaigns I'll talk about. Like there was one called 8,000 Mentors that was a call out to youth in care to get mentors for youth in care. There were the Mentoring Month campaigns that ran. There were different issue-specific campaigns around targeted populations or supporting, other recruitment initiatives by local member agents. The second piece was partnerships, and the third piece was content. So that was sort of the AMP recruitment funnel. So an example of the campaigns, the AMP pulled together the mentoring community around Alberta and said, what can we do together to raise the profile of mentoring? And so one of the examples of that was Mentoring Month. So January every year, this is started by Mentor USA, they do a big promotion around Mentoring Month. We know from research that two of the biggest recruitment months for mentoring programs are September and January. And so January, we helped launch a Mentoring Month campaign around Alberta for at least 4 years. I believe it's the fourth or the fifth year coming up. And so different communications, videos, images, promotions, social media campaign, media releases, everything were sent out on behalf of the Alberta community. So one thing we did during Mentoring Month was we did a rough estimate of what the mentoring wait lists were across Alberta, and sent out a media release across to all of the provincial outlets saying, we estimate there's about a wait list of 3,200 young people who are waiting for a mentor this year in Alberta. And then we invited each of the local agencies to contact the media and give their own local story, have their own local speakers, have their own local touch or pitch to it. And it got picked up all over by radio, TV, newsprint. It was a very successful approach. And people enjoyed the connection to both their local story, but also as part of the provincial narrative too, of how we're not alone, we're part of something across Alberta, and that's one of the strategies that we employed. So how specifically when the AMP, one of the benefits of being a partner of an AMP, one of the benefits of being a partner of the AMP is that you benefit when mentoring benefits. So when We put out ad campaigns, bought media, earned media, any of those newsletters. We always drove traffic back to albertamentors.ca. And the benefit of doing that, instead of sending it to a local agency here or there, was that sometimes people would hear the ad on the radio, but there may not be a mentoring program in their community. But by going to albertamentors.ca, they could hear about other mentoring programs in their community, because Alberta is quite geographically dispersed, and sometimes there's programs that are not taking volunteers at the moment, but other ones are. So we were all part of this strategy together to raise the profile of mentoring and drive more traffic to one common site. Because the benefit when you came to that common site was we had a geo lookup tool where you could type in your community, you could type in the region of the province you were in, you could search through the partners, and you could find a way to start mentoring in your own local community. If you knew somebody who would make a great mentor, like if you wanted to nominate your retired parent who keeps bothering you about the state of your yard, is that too close to home? Well, you can nominate them as a mentor. Also, if you're a mentoring program who wants to be a part of this experience, you can fill in a form to become a partner of the AMP for no fee, and you can be profiled on the Mentor Organization search tool. So this allows a participant to then, if they see a program they like, if you say, yeah, I'm Michael, I'm in Red Deer, I want to apply to Youth HQ in Red Deer and become a mentor. When you fill in that information, it directly connects Michael to Youth HQ in Red Deer, and then that starts the application conversation. Now, Youth HQ is still responsible for screening Michael as a volunteer, connecting with them, training with them, making sure that they're a right fit. But AMP is the conversation broker to make sure that everybody benefits. So if Youth HQ, for instance, wasn't taking volunteers, maybe Michael would find another opportunity in Red Deer, like the Crossroads Community Church or something like that. So it's a way of raising the bar, and we're all in this together. So any marketing we do, any promotions we do benefit the whole, and we all see an increased return on investment. So it really was a content marketing strategy around many, many different aspects. So shared videos, Instagram posts, common hashtags. We designed generic bridge banners, because in some communities, it really is that old school, hang a banner off a bridge kind of marketing. We designed movie theater ads, so trailers. Many theaters will run ads for free from nonprofit organizations. So we would provide a 30-second trailer that would show in the local theater talking about a pitch or a call for volunteers. And we had other resources that drew people in, not just to the marketing, but also gave them training and resources to think about how to do mentoring better. And it was always about scaling the in-kind contributions. So whatever people brought to us and said, here's what we're using, we'll share it across Alberta so everybody can benefit from these shared best practices. And it all drove back to a common message: become a mentor, start mentoring. And the results, well, they speak for themselves. Just last year in 2018, 2019, 1,175 new mentors were referred to partner agencies. And why we're so sure of that number is AMP tracked it through the mentor referral tool. So we know that that's over 1,000 original users put in their email to refer themselves to a mentoring program. They've tracked that youth mentoring has increased 250% since AMP was established. They know that using the online mentor training that AMP has established, over 11,000 Albertans have been trained to date, including over 1,000 last year. AMP's website has very significant traffic. The resources and the tools have been downloaded almost 4,000 times. They host webinars, they have their podcasts, they have different tools and resources, including a partnership with Alberta Education, where there's actually credits for high school students to do mentoring. So all of this to say, AMP's been doing this for 12 years. They've proven that it works, and these are many of the tools, tactics, and strategies that we're hoping to employ across Canada for all of you through the Canadian Mentoring Partnership Plan. So this is sort of what we would be rolling out from if we were having the Canadian Mentoring Symposium this year. We would be talking about, so what are ways we can together harness collective impact in terms of common recruitment, common messages, common tools, common resources, so that all of us can benefit across Canada, and that all young people can benefit. We know that there's over 4.1 million young people in Canada who there's more than enough young people who need mentors to go around, and there's space for all of us to think about how we can contribute to this strategy. What AMP really asked for was, you can take any of this content, go ahead and use it. We just ask that you share back with us your stock photos, your videos, your imagery, etc., so that we can build a common database for everyone to be that rising tide to lift all of the boats. And it worked. And just as AMP did it, we want to do the same thing at the Canadian Mentoring Partnership. So our strategy here is that we're going to be working to build awareness in Canada through campaigns and advocacy, through content, through developing tools, resources, training that will be of benefit to the mentoring community across Canada, and you get to be a part of it. Same thing with recruitment. We're working to build a common mentor connector, a place where it will be a one-stop shop. Wherever you are in Canada, you can find a mentoring opportunity close to you. Similarly, for programs, you can be listed, and this will increase your ability to get profile, get training, get access to new volunteers, new funders, new donors, new attention. It's all around, it's good, and it's a rising tide that lifts all of the boats. And similarly for partnerships, like the studies you'll be hearing about later today, how can we do a better job of knowledge mobilization across Canada, connecting academics, connecting researchers, and taking all of this knowledge and actually making it live and relevant in the field so that it can bolster what we're doing. And we can find the leaders from around the world, like say Dan Horgan, who's going to be joining us here today, to tell us about practices that have worked elsewhere, and we can bring them north of the border. So moving forward, my goal is that we'll be establishing closer to looking forward for the next year for Mentoring Month, looking at some sort of either a marketing mastermind group or a working group or a community of practice that will help us together come together as marketing people and as communications people and say, what are we doing? What are some of the messages that we're doing? What are resources that we can draw on together to help grow? CMP is committed to doing another Mentoring Month campaign next year, and we want to make sure it's informed by your feedback and your experience. So as I said, our goal, we will be creating a one-stop shop for mentoring marketing materials that you can share. This is especially helpful to small agencies who don't have the same access to supports and resources. We want to be a place where we can share creative ideas, tools, resources, training. We are looking to create assets that are white label, that are basically fill in the blank, print ready. You can write in your own mentoring agency name, phone number, email, and you can use that poster. It's a way that we can essentially be, as CMP, the marketing agency for the small mentoring programs around Canada to help recruit and engage more mentors. So we're going to be building this together, and this is what we're going to be doing. And as we look ahead, I think the next milestones for us in this journey are the back to school, September 2020, whatever that looks like, virtual or in person, Mentoring Month, January, so for 2021. And I put your special celebration. Is there an event or a milestone or something that you're doing? I would encourage you to reach out to me and let us know so we can talk about doing that together and to celebrate that. So before we go to Dan, I just want to share one quick video to give you an example of how the Alberta Mentoring Partnership created the videos for the movie theaters. So.
Oh yeah! Living in a lonely world. You took the midnight train going anywhere. Oh man, that was awesome.
So I'll just pause that. Sorry.
There was a quick question about the age definition of youth, your 4.1 million. Do we stop at 24, 25, 29?
I think that was the federal government definition under 30. I believe that was from the feds. So yeah, so I think it's a really exciting time ahead. It's a great time to have this partnership. It's a great time to think ahead about what we can do across Canada. And speaking of exciting initiatives, I'd like to hand over the mic to Daniel Horgan. Get that going here. So Daniel is the founder and CEO of Collabl, Daniel has over 20 years of experience working in the business and nonprofit sectors, fueled by his commitment to increasing others' access to relationships and opportunities that transform their lives. At Collabl, Daniel is working at the intersection of talent, development, and community building with a specific focus on creating and facilitating brand, relationship, skill-building experiences that support existing and future talent. It was a fantastic opportunity to work with Dan in Edmonton before the coronavirus hit and we had to cancel our future events, but his reputation precedes him. He's done a ton of work across the United States, especially engaging corporations and other partners that are big wins for the mentoring movement. So Dan, I'll pass over to you and just let me know when to skip the slides.
Awesome. Thanks, Michael. You can jump to the first one. So there's this great quote out there that says, change is inevitable, growth is optional. So change is inevitable, growth is optional. So I want to start there by just first and foremost saying that we're all navigating a lot of uncertainty and a lot of change lately. And so I just appreciate everybody taking the time to be a part of today's session, to be part of the Canadian Mentoring Partnership, because young people need these webs of support. And we all can play an active role in helping them to build those webs of support, which ultimately will unlock an immense amount of opportunity for them to achieve whatever academic, career, life goals they set for themselves. The growth, though, the growth in the number of mentors that we're able to recruit, engage, and sustain is optional, right? And so it really requires us to be very intentional about the process that we follow to get there. So I want to first and foremost just start, outside of saying thank you, by sharing my contact information and saying, if there's anything that I share today, as we try to equip you with tips and tactics, ways of thinking about mentor recruitment that you want to dive further into, or you have follow-up questions around that we can't get to in today's session, I absolutely invite you to reach out to me. I'm happy to provide additional guidance and support to anybody who's in this space. We're all on a shared mission, and I certainly appreciate learning from others that are in the field as well. So with that, I'm going to ask you just to, Michael, if you could flip to the next slide. We're going to go on a little bit of a journey in the time that I have with you today in thinking about scaling mentorship as a pathway to success for young people, for you as a professional, and for our organizations and communities. The very first part of that journey that I'm going to take you on is getting really super clear about our give and our get priorities. In other words, what is it that you as an organization, as a professional, have to offer potential mentors in the field? And what do you need from them in order to meet the needs that young people have identified themselves, that they need to be successful? Then we will look at prioritizing targeted relationships. So instead of just going out and doing massive recruitment to just anybody who will listen to us, how do we get really thoughtful and really targeted in terms of the relationships that we're trying to build and then connect to the young people in our programs, even connecting young people with these opportunities to do some of that work themselves. Making the connections is one thing. It's a question I get all the time, is how do I get in the door? How do I just get access to the decision makers who could help unlock a whole network of mentors for our organization or for the young people we engage? We'll talk about balancing teaching and learning. So once you've got your foot in the door, how do you lead with learning? So instead of leading with the pitch, leading with learning in order to customize or modify the pitch to align and really land in a way with the target audience that you want it to in order to get the results that you're aiming to achieve. Then that moves into initiating the engagement and ultimately keeping that engagement. The one thing I say all the time to young people when we talk about building networks, it's not always about the quantity. It's not about how many LinkedIn connections can you make or how many business cards can you collect when you're at a networking event. It's also about the quality of those connections and relationships. So once you've made that connection, what are you going to do with it? Right? How are you going to steward that relationship over time? How are you going to continually think about that relationship from a perspective of what value can I add to this individual that I'm now partnered up with? So we're going to start with the first step, defining give and get priorities. Michael, if we can flip to the next slide. And the very first question I ask you to think about, if you want to jump in the chat box and share what comes to mind for you, or if you want to grab a notebook right by you and jot down some initial ideas. Again, our goal here is to try to equip you with a lot of different tools and tactics to think about this work. But the first question I challenge people to think about in mentor recruitment is, what value do you offer mentors? So what value do you bring to any Canadian who is out there thinking about, or not yet even thinking about, being a mentor for a young person across the country, okay? So when you think about what value you bring them, I want you to think about how do you align to their sense of purpose? As all of us are constantly in a state of wanting to be seen, heard, and know that we matter in the work that we do, whether it's the formal job that we have in our employment or the work we do outside of quote unquote work, in creating the best life for ourselves and for the loved ones around us. So how in providing mentorship opportunities are you aligning to someone's purpose? How are you creating opportunity for someone to either explore or elevate their passion with a group of young people? So I have a passion for technology. How do I share that passion with a group of young people that maybe aren't as familiar with all that technology careers can bring them, or aren't as familiar with the ways that they can use technology to solve problems that they themselves as young people care about? We want to think about the value you bring to potential mentors in aligning to their values, right? The things that they use as a filter to the thoughts that they have, the actions or the decisions that they make every day. How are you helping people live out their values through mentorship? The other area is around skills. So when you think about being in a mentorship relationship, whether it's one-on-one or in group-based or in virtual relationships, we are learning, all of us, not just the young people, all of the mentors themselves are also further developing skills that will create success for them too. It will help set them up for success at work. Maybe it's helping them to develop communication skills or the ability to actively listen or be more present with the people that they're trying to support or further build a relationship with. And then lastly, when thinking about partnering with companies or networks, how are you helping them to drive engagement with their employees, with their customers, with their vendors? And then ultimately, how are you helping to elevate their brands? So if you're partnering with a company who's able to unlock a whole network of mentors for your program, how do you help put a spotlight on their commitment to your cause, the cause that you both care so much about? If we flip to the next slide, so that's how we bring value. And I always encourage us to start there. How do you lead with what you can give versus what you need or what you want, right? The second question then is, if we want to target certain relationships, target certain groups, to be very specific about going after what young people need, we've got to ask young people. We got to go to the front lines and say to them, what do you want from a mentor? What do you need from a mentor in order to either clarify or achieve the goals that you set for yourself, whether it's tied to academics or work or life in general? And then ask yourself, who has it, right? If I'm a young person and I am in college or university and I'm trying to figure out where I'm going to go once I graduate, what I'm going to do next, who is it that has potential answers to those questions? Who can they learn from? Who can they expand their professional network with? Who can they explore different types of career pathways that they might not have ever heard of before in the programming and in the partnerships with you as an organization or as a program? So again, the second part of this is being really targeted in who has the things that the young people that are your target audience, they're the young people that you're trying to engage and serve and meet the needs of. How do we clarify who has those things and how do we target those specific groups? If we flip to the next slide, that moves us right into this idea of making connections. So how do we get in the door? I have this expression I use all the time that awareness drives action, right? The easiest way to explain it is if you have a friend, a family member, a loved one who calls you up and shares with you a hard time or a challenge that they're facing or an obstacle that they're trying to navigate, most of us, our immediate response is, how can I help, right? What can I do to help you navigate this situation? And so awareness around not just your mission, what you stand for as a program or an organization, but awareness around the realities of the young people that you have engaged. So what is a day in the life of the young people that you have in your programs? And then what are the engagement opportunities? So you cascade it from here's our mission, here's the young people's reality, where we're meeting them, where they are. And here are all the different ways that you can contribute to our mission in partnership with young people. When you raise that sense of awareness, you achieve your goal, which is ultimately alignment. Alignment between what that mentor is looking for in terms of the value that you can bring them and what that young person needs or wants right now. And when you start bringing those two things together, that's when the magic starts to happen. The connections start to be made between the people you're trying to recruit and the people that are not just raising their hand, but they're signing up and they're going through the steps necessary to really be a great mentor for a group of young people or an individual. One thing I just want to reiterate in that point is we've got to start on the front lines of our organizations and of our communities in raising awareness. So if we flip to the next slide, what I mean by that is once you ask young people in their words, in their voice, what is it you need or want, then it's about how do you translate that through a variety of different awareness channels, right? Everything from what Michael had shared around the social media work that's been super effective for the Alberta Mentoring Partnership, looking at your current mentors, how do you equip them with tools and techniques to go out there and spread the word about their work, really sharing what it has done for them, what value they have gained from the experience, and from the young person or people that they're supporting, what have they gained in that partnership as well. Engaging young people, not tokenizing them, but giving them a platform for their voice to be really amplified and recognized for the value that it brings, not just a mentorship relationship, but to a community, to a program, right? So there's all these different awareness channels that you see here on this slide. The thing that I think is most important is the consistency of messaging. So if I were to call up your program and talk to the very first person who answers the phone, all the way to your board chair, and to a young person who's on a waiting list, would I hear consistent messaging in what it is that I, as a potential mentor, could do to contribute or add value to your mission? If the consistency is not there in the marketplace, as the messaging ripples out through these different channels, it becomes really confusing, and confusion leads to disengagement. And so if we want to recruit, we want to scale mentorship, we've got to be super clear. We got to speak with clarity around what it is that we're looking for to meet both mentors and youth where they are and bring them closer and closer together. PESO is a model around awareness building and thinking about, as an organization or a program, how are we leveraging these four channels? So paid, whether it's Google ads, for example, or social media ads to help amplify the work that we're doing and the role that mentors can play. Through earned media, talking about the unique human interest stories of our organizations. The shared media, meaning us and our partners on social media, sharing the news about what's happening, the progress that we're making. And then owned. So how are we owning certain channels and putting those out through a newsletter or through another communications channel that you've created as an organization, perhaps a YouTube channel that you are promoting the programs, the work of your organization as well. If we flip to the next slide, the sort of bottom line point around making connections is first and foremost starting with what you're familiar with, which is your existing relationships. So how are you leveraging board members, staff, donors, volunteers, partners in the process of opening doors, making introductions to folks that could be engaged in mentoring relationships. The second is to cultivate new relationships. And my number one tip here is to really think about not always going to the same circles. So having worked many, many years in nonprofit, we find ourselves in the same room with the same people, oftentimes, unfortunately, having the same conversations. And so I challenge people to say, how do I go to new rooms with new people that aren't at all familiar with the work that we're doing in the mentoring field and start to bring that awareness to them in order to drive the action that we want? In other words, for example, if you were running a mentoring program, how are you connecting with the local HR professional association within your region or community? These are talent recruiters. These are folks managing learning and development for employees at local companies. How are you building relationships with those folks who could unlock doors to employees being engaged in your mentoring program to both develop their skills and to give back in a meaningful way to the community in partnership with you and the young people in your program? The last part is focusing on multiple champions. One of the things that I would credit to a lot of successes I've had with programs is I never bet all my money on one particular individual. There's so much transition, so many different priorities that can take people's attention away from one particular goal. And so when you partner with networks or partner with companies or organizations, building those multiple channels across multiple levels, multiple divisions, can be really effective in helping you to build a sustainable relationship, right? So the focus here is about not just making a connection, but building a relationship. It's not about the transaction of the moment. It's about the long-term benefits of building a partnership with an individual or a group of individuals that's mutually beneficial for everybody engaged. If we flip to the next slide, after you get your foot in the door, you start to get some introductions under your belt. It's really important here to balance teaching and learning. And again, I encourage you to lead with value add. Part of leading with value add is meeting people where they are. And part of doing that effectively and recruiting mentors is not leading with the sales pitch, right? I get it, we're passionate, we really need mentors. In some cases, we're really desperate because we're trying to meet the needs of our waiting lists. But when we come across in a sale, quote unquote, by just telling people what we need them to do, we've lost them at the very beginning. If we create a connection with somebody by amping up our sense of curiosity and really seeking to understand what is their driver, what are the things that motivate them, what is the value that they're looking for in an experience or in an opportunity, then we can customize, we can be specific in really giving our best pitch in a way that they see themselves in that pitch. That's how we start first, by learning and then leading with teaching. Here are the opportunities where you can engage. Another thing I would just share in this space around being open to learning is that you are able to build more rapport, more trust, more likability factor when you acknowledge that you can learn from all sorts of people that you're out trying to recruit as mentors. That rapport, trust, and likability unlocks the opportunity for you to bring them along a continuum of engagement. So if we flip to the next slide, I want to share with you something I often see missing in first nonprofit organizations, but often in mentoring programs, and that is a mentor stewardship plan. Now, I've raised a lot of money in the fundraising space, and I liken this to donor development, right? You build a connection with a potential donor, you steward that relationship, and once they come on the on-ramp, maybe they give the first $10. Then you think about, how do I move that donor up the continuum by engaging them in unique and creative ways? The same is true when thinking about how are you stewarding, once you've made a connection, the relationship with a potential mentor, right? So first and foremost, meeting them where they are. There's all these different on-ramps, and then creating a very intentional stewardship plan to move them up in different phases to deepen their engagement, to deepen their investment in the work that you're doing. That doesn't always mean more time commitment. That sometimes means, how are you training them up to be great brand ambassadors, partners with you out there recruiting from their networks, right? So the bigger the army of folks that you have out advocating for mentoring and helping to recruit people by expanding the table and adding more seats to the movement, the more successful we all will be in being able to match all 4.1 million of those Canadian young people with not just one mentor, but a web of support around them. So an example of a continuum of engagement you see here is, and this is an example from my work in the workforce development, youth development space. Oftentimes you'd go in and you say, hey, would you be willing to offer an internship for a young 18-year-old senior in high school who's getting ready to go off to university for their first year next fall? And often the time would be, no, we have a limited number of spots. It's really competitive, all that. Oh, I really appreciate your consideration, really appreciate the fact that you even offer internships. I'm wondering, would you be willing to do an informational interview, just 30 minutes with some of our graduating seniors so they can learn more about a day in the life of your role? Oh, no, I don't really have time to do that. We have so much on our plate. Totally get it. I understand everybody has so much on their plate. Would you be willing, if I sent a resume over to you, if you had 15, 20 minutes, any time in the day, and the time in the weekend, to just give some feedback, jot some notes down on the resume, send it back to us, and we'll share it with the young person? Absolutely, I could do that. So finding your way in is all about meeting that person, that potential mentor, where they are, right? Once they do the resume review, what is your intentional stewardship plan to move them from the resume review to the informational interview and ultimately to unlocking opportunities potentially for internships or other types of workplace learning experiences? If you flip to the next slide, it's just another example of this same strategy put into action. So thinking about if there's a specific on-site one-time volunteer project that you can get people engaged in, and then think about how do you maintain communications with those folks and move them up the continuum of engagement so that you, again, are stewarding, not just meeting them where they are, but stewarding the relationship over time. The important part here is that this relates 100% to young people. We talk in the youth development field about meeting young people where they are. Some young people aren't ready to jump into the programs that we have. And so how are we creating partnerships with other programs that are more aligned with where that young person needs to be right now in order to develop skills or to gain access or confidence in a particular area? And then almost create a talent pipeline, thinking about how do you move that young person between programs to meet their needs, right? Not just the outputs or outcomes that we need for grants or for renewal of funding, but to really first and foremost put all of our attention on where that young person is. How do we move? How do we steward that relationship with that young person so that they're getting what they need when they need it from the right source, the expertise that is matched to the need. If we flip to the next slide, great book to put in your toolbox is a book published back in 2014 from Daniel Pink called To Sell is Human. And what Daniel emphasizes in this book is that all of us are selling every day. So when we think about creating these relationships with potential mentors, the 3 ABCs that are super important for us to keep in mind in being able to initiate the engagement is attunement. How are we practicing empathy to understand the needs, the wants, the desires, the values of those potential mentors? Again, targeted relationships versus just throwing spaghetti to the wall and hoping that some of our messaging sticks to somebody who hears it. How are we being very targeted in our outreach and recruitment efforts? The second is buoyancy. Along that continuum, you are bound to hear no. So how do you bounce back from that and get to a point of yes? So some form of entry in that can enable you to move over time up. And that last point is around clarity. So being super clear from the very beginning about what it's going to take for you to achieve your goal, the goal of the young person in your program, and the goal of the mentor that you've now brought into the equation. So attunement, buoyancy, and clarity being super important for us to think about. The second thing I would just encourage you when you think about to sell as human, practicing really great salesmanship and influence, is a lot of us self-identify as either an introvert or an extrovert. And what Daniel talks about is the most highly effective sales folks and influencers out there that are highly effective recruiters are people who both talk and listen. So acknowledging they've got one mouth and 2 ears, they balance, they're an ambivert, right? They're in the middle of the introvert and the extrovert because they're curious. They lead with curiosity to understand what the mentor wants and needs. And then they align that to either their program or to another program in the field that meets that mentor where they are in the equation of trying to build, again, stronger webs of support for young people. If we flip to the next slide, making the pitch is one of the things that I often get questions around, like how do you make the best pitch that's going to land really well once you've got your foot in the door to really initiate the engagement. Opportunity Agenda published this formula years and years ago, and it literally goes like this. You can use this formula to give like a 30-second pitch. It starts by leading with values and vision, right? We believe that all young people should have a support system to help guide them towards the goals they set for themselves. I would guarantee you have a hard time finding somebody who disagrees with that point, right? But the fact is that 1 in 3 young people don't have anybody around them supporting them in school, in their path to work, or in life in general. But we can change that. So you went from the vision, the values, the thing we all agree to, you cast your wide net, to the problem that puts that vision and values in being threatened, right? The solution is where you quickly pivot to say, at our organization, we have 3 ways that we can engage mentors, volunteers from our community. They're this, and this, right? And you can say, we can need people to help amplify messaging on our social media to raise awareness around our program and around the needs of our young people and the opportunities to work with us. We need people to sign up for some of our one-time projects to support students that are on our waiting list. And we need people to make the longer-term commitment to be part of our formalized mentoring program. You've given people options in your solution that are low, medium, and high effort. which again is meeting people that you're pitching to where they are. They can see themselves along that continuum, plot where they are, and figure out maybe where they can get engaged. You land with a call to action. And the call to action is, can we count on you to assist with one of those 3 solutions that we've outlined? And so there's an opportunity for someone to respond yes or no. And if the answer is no, for you to be curious. Use that objection or rejection as an opportunity to learn from that individual. What is it that's missing? What is it they need to get to the yes, either in that moment or down the road? Okay, so it's not about being overly pushy, but it's about being persistent in learning so that you can inform your broader mentor recruitment strategy. We flip to the next slide. The last part of our journey, step 6, is about not just getting to a point of engagement, but how do you sustain that engagement? So sustaining engagement is all about being memorable. And I did a lot of work in the US here with Target. And one of the things I love about Target's customer experience strategy is it has this phrase, surprise and delight. Always surprise and delight the customers. Just like we in the mentoring field should be thinking about how are we surprising and delighting the young people in our programs and the mentors that we are recruiting and trying to engage as participants with us on this journey. And there's all sorts of ways that we can do that. The number one path to getting to some of the best answers is specifically asking the young people and the mentors already engaged in your programs, what is it that we could do to surprise and delight, to give you the wow factor for your engagement, to not only celebrate you, but elevate your experience in order to mobilize other people to get involved with you in the field. And just showing them that rippling effect can create, again, these stronger webs of support for young people. Not one person has to be solely accountable for a young person's success, but it's a web of support that we're building around each and every one of them. I want to give you a really quick example as I wrap up. So if we flip to the next slide, as Michael mentioned, we launched with the Canadian Mentoring Partnership back in early 2020, the Power of Mentoring campaign. This campaign was based off a campaign I ran over the last year and a half in the States called 10,000 Connections, which was a partnership between Mentor, the US version of the Canadian Mentoring Partnership, and Starbucks LinkedIn. And the 3 of us came together to say, let's mobilize LinkedIn professionals with young people, 16 to 24, in Starbucks stores for career conversations, opening the door for that young person to gain career insights, as well as expand their professional networks. It was a one-time ask of our LinkedIn professionals to come out for an hour and a half, 2-hour event to connect with a number of young people over multiple rounds of career mentoring conversations, each of which was about 20 minutes in length. And at the end, if you did not want to connect any further, you certainly did not have to. That was not part of the commitment. But if you were inspired by your experience and you wanted to stay in touch with that young person or get more involved with one of our program partners in that respective city, there was certainly an invitation for you to do that as well. So the Power of Mentoring campaign in Canada, as Michael mentioned, kicked off in Edmonton pre-COVID and very quickly pivoted to a virtual strategy. So our goal is to mobilize young people from all your programs in partnership with employee volunteers from the private sector across Canada. We're specifically looking for the 18 to around 24-year-old who is interested in connecting with employee volunteers to provide career insights and expand professional networks. If we flip to the next slide, the way that it works is we essentially have 4 different event formats that we're using for these events, again, all of which have been pivoted to virtual. So there is Pathways and Perspectives. So Pathways and Perspectives is all about a career mentoring panel discussion. We engage 3 to 5 panelists, different stages of their career, different industries, sharing context about their life journey, things that they wish they would have known starting out in their career, and just, again, engaging in Q&A with a group of young people from, again, any of your programs that are interested in participating. The second format is called Learning with Leaders, and it engages young people in one-on-one or small group discussions with a group of employee volunteers, again, representing different levels of their career, different industries, different functions. And we have a facilitated guide that walks the mentor and the young person through a 20 to 25 minute virtual, one-on-one, or small group discussion. And we do some warm-up activities in the very beginning with everybody around personal branding and networking, frankly, just to warm everybody up. I know we always think young people are super nervous about these experiences. The reality is that most of the mentors that have signed up for these are also nervous about the experience. And so we try to ease everyone's nerves and just jumpstart a pretty fun interactive activity before we dive into the virtual sessions. The third is called Focused Connections. This is where we do sort of a fireside chat around a particular theme with a leader. So it might be a STEM leader from a STEM career pathway. It might be an LGBTQ leader in the month of June as part of Pride celebration. Or we might focus on female leadership and looking at gender equality in the workplace. But we do a fireside conversation followed by small group breakouts with employee volunteers connecting with young people and really reflecting on what they just heard and sharing their own ideas, their own thoughts based on their own lived experience. Again, balancing teaching and learning from each other. The fourth and final format for that event is all focused on skill development. So it's when we engage folks in large group and small group activities to be able to build certain skills that are in high demand among employers, but at the same time, help build networks, help expand professional contacts for young people with the employee volunteers that are coming out to the event. So I would just say real quick up front, if anybody is interested, we've been running a number of them. We just did one with the Canadian Council for Youth Prosperity on May 4th. We just did one on last week with Deloitte in Canada. We have a number of projects that we are lining up for the summer in June and July. So if any of your programs are interested, we'll make sure that everybody has the Power of Mentoring link on the Canadian Mentoring Partnership website to check out those opportunities and to register any of your young people in your program. And with that, I'm gonna turn it back to Michael and the team, and certainly again, say thank you so much for having me and engaging me in the conversation today.
So I'd encourage you, if you have any questions for Dan, to put them in the Q&A. We're just going to show a very quick 3-minute video about the experience in Edmonton. It was electric, and I think this does a great job of capturing it.
I think we could probably make sure everybody gets the link to the video too. It doesn't seem like the sound. It's very energizing, I promise you, with the music and the actual interviews in the video. So we encourage everyone to take a listen to the session.
And just building that sense of community.
I love leaders with humility and a willingness to listen and learn and admit they don't know everything. It's a tremendous message to send to young people.
I learned that people are a lot more caring. People look out for others a lot more than what I originally thought. So it's not just you against the world. There's others out there looking out for you, wanting to give you the opportunities that you need and give you the help that you need to achieve whatever it is that you want to achieve in your life.
The thing I love about Power of Mentoring events is it doesn't just stop at the event. There's an opportunity after the event for you as a participant, whether you're a young person or a mentor, to go back and tell your network all about your experience, to mobilize them to step up and engage in similar style events, or to sign up to be a mentor with a local mentoring program.
My apologies there. I guess the sound didn't work for the first minute. We learn our way through technology. So thank you for your patience. Now, just going back to the PowerPoint, I'm going to check the Q&A. Does anybody have any questions they'd like to ask Dan at this time? Dan, I one question that we often got was about, we talk about mentoring. It's about a long duration relationship, sometimes a year, sometimes multi-year. How do the power of mentoring, which are just one night episodic events, how do they contribute to a longer relationship mentoring strategy?
Yeah, I mean, I think that one thing that's super important goes back to the example I shared about donor development. So most of us in the fundraising space, you don't go out to a new donor and raise $1 million, right? And the same is true when we think about trying to generate mentors for our programs. We oftentimes don't go out and get somebody who says, absolutely, I'll sign up, I'll meet with a young person every week for the next year or two, right? And so how do we create these experiences? Again, meeting people where they are. There's going to be a very select few. If you take 100% pie, there's going to maybe be 5% of people who will say, yes, sign me up every week for the next year. There's going to be 80+% that are going to say, yeah, that's not for me. I've never done it before. I can't be a good mentor. I wouldn't know what to do. I don't know how to connect. I don't know where to connect. And so what we have to do is we have to meet that 80% plus where they are. And the power of mentoring events gives people an opportunity to step in and experience it. We had a great employee volunteer, Clara from RBC of Canada, come out to one of our events in Edmonton. She came back to an event we just did with the Canadian Council for Youth Prosperity, reached out to us after that event and said, I would love to get more connected. I can't make a longer term commitment, but I'd love to go more in depth than these one-time experiences with a young leader. And one of our youth participants from Edmonton had just started a nonprofit organization. So I immediately connected the two of them on LinkedIn, and they've been meeting. And so it's a great example of we have to create these pathways for people to experience and ultimately engage on their terms. When they get value, when we lead with the value that we have to offer and they see that value, they get it, that's where the magic happens. And that's where you start stewarding and cultivating that engagement over time, over the long haul.
Great question. Yeah. The other piece here in the chat box, Steve asks, executives will be very busy handling all of the challenges and changes in their businesses. They may simply not have the time. How do we tailor our pitch when we can't even see the potential mentor? I think they mean in person. So wondering if you could comment at that at all and your experience right now. I know you're working with a number of businesses during this COVID recovery time.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the biggest mistakes we try to make, we try to do everything ourselves, and that's not effective. We only have, we have a limited amount of time every single day that we can dedicate to certain activities. And so what's really important is we got to look around ourselves and say, who do we already have engaged? And how do we mobilize them as our ambassadors? So not just our current and already existing mentors, but how do we engage the young people themselves who are a part of our programs to help us with the mentor recruitment piece, right? To do some relationship mapping to see who do they have like surface level relationships with that could go even deeper if they had a little bit more structure or if they had activities that they could pull from to facilitate that type of connection, right? So I would say leverage your existing base of supporters, youth and mentors, to help you in the process of mobilizing and recruiting other people. The key there is just be super consistent, again, in the messaging. So being clear about what it is you're looking for. You don't want an army of ambassadors out there all saying different things, because again, that's where it's going to start to break down. And so that would be my best advice there. I also see a question here about re-engaging with inactive mentors.
Yeah, that's one we get quite a bit.
Yeah, I say this all the time, and someday I'm going to write a book, and this will be the title of the book, called Frontline. I believe so much that the easiest, most important solution to most of our problems within the nonprofit sector and within the mentoring field is that we don't spend enough time on the front line and engaging the front line in the shaping of our work. I give the Canadian Mentoring Partnership a huge amount of credit. I know you guys are doing the surveys and all of that. When you ask people what they want, what they need, what they can contribute, you hear directly from the people that you need to build and grow the movement. And so again, if you have inactive mentors, what I would say is find some creative ways of getting to know from them why they are inactive, what it is that's standing in their way, what are some of the barriers that are preventing them from increasing their engagement, and then be very intentional about addressing those particular barriers to sort of jumpstart, to reimagine the way that you can engage them. If that doesn't work, I mean, I think one of the key points here is to think about when people think of your organization, they think just like they think of Nike as a certain brand personality. You have to get really honest with yourselves and with the community about what is your brand personality, the brand experience that people have when they interact with your program and with your organization. When you get really honest about that, it helps you to understand how you're showing up in the community. And if you can create or modify that brand experience in a way that attracts the people to you, so you're doing less of all of the reactive work, but you are proactively sort of creating something that people want to be a part of, it'll help, again, jumpstart new doors being opened for you and people calling you and saying like, hey, you know, I really value the work that you're doing and I want to be a part of it. What can I do to help? And that's your invitation to say, here's a number of engagement opportunities. Which one seems right for you? Meeting you where you are.
Thank you for that, Dan. We encourage you to keep posting questions in the Q&A. After the fact, Dan is going to stick around and we'll still be talking. But now, taking Dan's advice about listening to the front line, we are bringing you the front line right here, an opportunity to survey across Canada a high-end market research study. This is it right here. So I'm going to turn over to my colleague Veronique to share a little bit more about this third state of mentoring research study.
Thanks, Michael. If you can pull up the slides again, we're still seeing your YouTube screen.
Oh.
So yeah, you know, there's a lot today. We're switching between YouTube and there will be Mentimeter in a second and then the slides. So thank you, Michael. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Veronique Church-Duplessis. I'm the Director of Research and Evaluation at the Canadian Mentoring Partnership. And I'm working closely with Michael on this market research piece to get to understand what mentor recruitment and retention strategies would be most effective for various communities across Canada. And we'll need your input on how we're going to do that and how we're going to design our survey in a moment. That's what Christina and Jennifer, our partners at SRDC, will be talking about. Michael, if we can move a bit ahead to next slide. Yeah, that one, right? So we talked a little bit at the beginning about the two surveys that we have open at the moment. The first one, the youth survey, trying to understand young people's access to and experiences of mentoring. So that survey is open right now, and we encourage you to participate in that. The second piece, right, looking at the prevalence, scope, structures, services, strengths, and challenges of mentoring programs and services across Canada is also open. We also need your input there. And finally, today we will be mostly focusing on our third study, raising the profile of mentoring, trying to understand how we can sorry, I have this have your faces all over the slide deck. Understand the capacity of Canadian adults to step up as mentors and try to help frontline organizations develop targeted, effective recruitment and retention strategy. So I'm not going to go into details about the two mapping the gap and capturing the landscape studies. If you're interested, you can watch the webinar we did in April. It will be uploaded to our YouTube channel in the next few weeks. And you can learn a lot more about that there. And there's also some information about our preliminary findings for young people's experiences of mentoring, which I think you will find quite interesting. I think we'll pass it over to Christina at SRDC. SRDC is a nonprofit organization, the nonprofit research organization we've engaged to work with us on the State of Mentoring research project.
Yeah, Christina and Jennifer, please unmute and thank you for joining us.
Okay, I think, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, great. First hurdle, done. So I'm Christina Hackett, and Jennifer Ray's also on the panel, and we work at the Social Research and Demonstration Corporation and have been supporting the partnership in doing this broad program of research to build the evidence base for mentoring in Canada, as Veronique mentioned. So Michael, we could probably skip ahead a few slides. Perfect. So just really briefly, today we're focusing on one component and of this sort of broader area of work. And so as a part of the kind of raising the profile of mentoring in Canada, we will be surveying adults in Canada to collect nationwide data about mentorship and to use that information and those findings to help inform mentor training, recruitment, and support across Canada. And this is in conjunction with the other information that we have. So we have first asked young people aged 18 to 30, as well as service provider organizations. So we can't plug enough that these things are out there, and please, send them around. But I think as Daniel and Veronique mentioned, it's been really important to hear from youth what they need, what was missing in their experiences, and help us to inform that part, as well as this other component, which is hearing from mentors and potential mentors in Canada about their perspectives on becoming mentors. So we can skip ahead a couple of slides. So today, during our time, we're going to be asking for your input, and afterwards, we will share just a few findings from our youth survey. And so we'll just go over the inspiration, I guess, for this work, which is the Power of Relationships survey in the United States, which was done by Mentor. As Daniel and others have mentioned, that's the US version of the Canadian Mentoring Partnership. And we are going to be asking you some questions to help us shape and adapt the questions and the sort of areas of inquiry in the Power of Relationships survey to the Canadian context, so that we make sure that the information we get is the most useful to organizations like yours and others who might be interested in recruiting mentors. We can go ahead. Basically, just that we're going to be polling you. So we're going to ask you to answer a series of questions, really to help us sort, adapt, and prioritize what information we ask about in the survey, so that we can feed it back to you. And this is a process that we've undergone for all the surveys, which was to gather input and then put them in the field. So we can go ahead to the next slide.
Christina, before we move ahead, I'm hearing that our interpreter is having issues hearing you. I don't know if you have a headset or something that can help.
Yeah, I can try here and see if we have better luck.
Well,
is this better?
Yep.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
I'm gonna look like a DJ.
No, that's good.
It sounds better on my hand. I'll check with the interpreter.
Okay.
Please continue for now.
Okay. All right. I'm in an area with pretty dodgy internet connection, so it's always a journey to get the right mix of audio visual. So in terms of, Michael, if you want to skip to the next slide, just briefly, in in the Power of Relationships survey in the United States, they broadly asked adults in the US about themselves. So, you know, personal characteristics and demographics, their motivation, if they self-identified as a mentor for mentoring, why they became mentors, and what would motivate them for becoming a mentor in the future. Tools and resources that would be helpful as a mentor, and then general views about mentoring and the willingness to support it as an activity, and then sort of general views on society and young people within society. So I think that Veronique is going to post the kind of overarching findings from that, just a summary of those in the chat box if you're interested in learning more about what they did. So if we just go ahead to the next slide, we really want to hear from you. We want to know what you're interested in knowing about from adults, so from this survey that we're about to put out there, about the individuals who mentor, as well as the environments that enable and support people to become mentors. And again, your input's really important to making this information useful, meaningful to you, and also actionable in practice. And so we're going to be taking the results from the polls, which will be completely anonymous. So you'll see them pop up in aggregate form, so all together. And we'll be using that to help refine and shape the information, so different response options in the survey, as well as kind of the emphasis on different types of questions, so that it's most, again, useful to you and an organization like yours. So we're going to be asking you about your experiences or opinions in recruiting mentors. You want to go to the next slide. About the characteristics of mentors and would-be mentors, growing and engaging mentors, and the types of information that would be useful to you. And we're going to do this in 2 ways if you want to skip ahead. So we're going to be asking you polls, and then we're also going to be asking you open-ended questions, which we'll flag for you, and you can post your responses in the chat box as they come up. So again, any responses that you put in polls will be completely anonymous. If you put it in the chat box, it's less anonymous. But there's no, you don't feel obligated to answer questions. We obviously would really like to hear your input. Yeah, we really look forward to hearing from you. So I'm just going to plant the seed about building a common language now, and we're going to come back to this later on. But we wanted to review a couple of key terms so we all have a common understanding of what we're talking about. And we've talked a lot about these, but they're living definitions, and so we want to get some feedback from you in a moment. But we want to be inclusive but specific enough so people can distinguish between different terms. And so in our youth and service provider surveys, we define formal and informal mentoring, as you can see on the slide. And I think Veronique has posted these definitions in the chat box in French. And so we'll put them back up. But the differentiation being that formal mentoring is structured within an organization and matches a young person with an adult, and informal is more a mentoring relationship that develops naturally. The next definition that we're interested in you reflecting on is the definition of the term mentor and what that includes and excludes. So Michael, if you can skip ahead to the next slide. So this is someone other than a parent or guardian who is usually older. And I won't read the whole definition, but essentially, if you just want to kind of take a moment to read this, and we'll be posting it up again as well, and reflect on that. And then the next set of definitions is the difference between a mentoring program and a mentoring service. And we use these terms throughout the polls and the questions today. So a mentoring program is a structured set of activities specifically related to mentoring, where mentoring is the ultimate objective and goal. And a mentoring service is a program or service for people where mentoring may exist, but it's not the ultimate objective. So again, we're going to invite your feedback on these later on. We can just move forward. We're going to start asking you some questions for you to fill out on Mentimeter. So I'm going to hand it over to Jennifer Ray.
Okay, so I think we're going to kind of toggle between the slides and Mentimeter here, but just to kind of test out the Mentimeter process and also to hear a little bit more of who's on the call today, we have a quick question. Well, two quick questions about the type of organization that you might be coming from, and then the group of youth that your organization might be focusing on or kind of primarily targeting their services towards. So for this, feel free to leave it blank if you want to. You don't have to answer it. If none of the responses that we have in this sort of like pre-selected categories really like resonate or fit with your organization or your program or your service, you can feel free to write your own descriptor there in the chat box. Part of the reason that we want to do this is once we kind of see who's here, we just really want to encourage everyone to participate in all of the polls. If you have a response that you'd like to share with everyone, because we want a diverse kind of group of answers. So I see we have a lot, it looks like, from the nonprofit or charity sector so far. Okay. Someone from education.
Yeah, so on your phone or on your tablet or computer, whatever you're using, you can open a new browser and go to menti.com and enter the code 835966, and you can provide your feedback and follow along.
Awesome, and I see there's some in the chat as well, so that's great. Okay, so we've got a little bit of variation, but it looks like a lot of people are coming from the nonprofit sector. So that's great. We can, oh, there's still some ticking in there. Okay. Oh, the countdown's on. Perfect. Okay, thanks, Michael. So we can go to the next one, but just to encourage everyone, regardless of where you fell on that or what your specific role or program type is, we can just have a really broad response to all of the polls and discussions today. So feel free to weigh in no matter what your specific perspective might be. So Michael, can you put the other one up there about the group of youth served? The next one?
Oh, the Menti?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, we'll go back to...
Sorry, this one's really gonna...
No. So there's sort of our result for that.
Perfect. A clear trend. Okay, and so then this one we were just kind of broadly curious if people were coming from organizations that were sort of universal, like serving a general youth population, or you might have a more targeted kind of select subgroup of youth that you're targeting with your program or your service. And feel free to type in the chat box if you want to share what particular subgroup you might be working with. Yeah, so I see for those of you, the 11, 12, 13 of you that did put in that it's a targeted program, it would be great to, if you could just type in the chat box if you do feel like sharing. Because this helps us also with our kind of language and the different categorizations, which is is something that becomes important for the survey when we're structuring multiple choice questions and that kind of thing.
Interesting. So some are targeting based on age and not necessarily other qualifiers such as youth at promise or particular socioeconomic or cultural groups.
Okay. Great.
Okay. So, feel free to keep sharing in the chat box. And I think the next couple of questions we're going to be asking about your experiences with growing the number of mentors.
So back to Mentimeter again?
Yeah, we're Michael, we're pretty much cruising
Just
through Mentimeter for the next little,
okay.
yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
no, that's helpful.
Yeah, so when recruiting adults or when they're considering becoming mentors, what are some of the considerations that you see people face or you hear people face? Great. And again, feel free to add any comments in the chat box. I just saw transportation pop up, and that's certainly a theme we hear a lot in a lot of our projects with youth. Okay.
This is really interesting. As we see this come in, it aligns pretty well with what the mentor study found in the United States. This is not particularly surprising. And I guess one of the things we can do with the study is confirm whether or not that is the case from the perspective of adults who could or do mentor.
I just saw that comment from Steve about clarifying information. You're right, it's very vague, but it's just the idea that you might hear from adults or prospective volunteers that they just don't have enough information about how to get involved, or like they're needing some more information that could help connect them.
And just before, sorry, I am now going back on what I said before, Michael. We're going to invite you to, in the chat box, also add or contribute, write down anything, strategies that you use to address important factors in recruitment and retention efforts. So anything that you do, any strategies that you currently use when thinking about these considerations. And you can let that marinate as well, and we can move on to the next poll.
I did pose a question in the chat box for folks so that they have a reminder of what we're asking, so you can refer to it and answer if anything comes to mind.
Great.
So I have a sort of interim thing here before we move back to Mentimeter, because we talked about this. We didn't want to spend too much time or kind of get sidetracked on this topic, but we also didn't want to just like ignore the elephant in the room. We wanted to give everyone just a chance to talk about the current context with COVID-19, and we're been thinking behind the scenes about how we can make sure that the survey is responsive to the sort of unique circumstances and the changes and challenges that have come with that. So, for example, we've been thinking about when we are surveying adults, we want to ask them specifically about their perspectives and experiences related to like the mentoring medium. So if they would be open to mentoring virtually or over the phone, for example, that might be a question that we'll add or adapt into the survey now based on everything going on. And we might ask specifically in the survey when they give certain responses, if they want to indicate whether their answers are different now because of COVID-19, like in their particular kind of short-term circumstances. So those are some of the things that we might be doing to kind of adapt the survey. But we also just wanted to ask everyone on the call today if you wanted to share anything about how your recruitment and retention efforts have been affected by COVID-19 and any sort of ideas about how you're adapting so far to this new context. So I invite you to just go in the chat box if you have anything you'd like to share specifically, or even any questions or suggestions that you might have for the survey with that context in mind. I see that comment there from Amanda about, lack of engagement right now, and it's a difficult time. Definitely recognize that. The technology challenges for sure.
Okay, and I think the poll we have up is in response to what do you want to learn from the Raising the Profile of Mentoring survey? So how to recruit looks like a big one. And I think we learned a lot of really interesting insights from Daniel. So it's a really neat resource.
Yeah, the retention piece is really interesting too.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and any other anything that's missing? So things that you would like to have information about that's not listed here, feel free to pop in the chat box. The next question asks about priorities for your mentoring program or organization. So is it in general getting more mentors total, recruiting mentors with specific qualifications, or from underrepresented groups? And again, if you don't see the response that you'd like to comment on, please put it in the chat box. Okay, I think we can.
So just to kind of follow up or expand on that question about sort of underrepresented groups that you might be trying to target with your recruitment efforts. The next question there in Mentimeter. Yeah, so this idea of whether your program or organization is interested in like micro-targeting your recruitment efforts towards a certain group in your community. So we recognize that some programs or services, they're keeping their recruitment efforts quite broad, but others have specific groups that they're really trying to reach. Okay, so it looks like, oh, interesting, okay. So
this is interesting, and I think it might, Michael, if you're able to speak to AMP's research on recruiting more male mentors in Alberta, that might be an interesting little segue here, because we know that that's a need for many organizations. That's a great example, actually. So the Alberta Mentoring Partnership hosted a research day in Edmonton that Veronique was at and spoke at about
recruiting more men into mentoring. We know that across Canada there are typically more women who volunteer to mentoring organizations, despite more young males being on the wait list for these programs. And many families have indicated they would like potentially a same gender match for a number of reasons. So there was a concern in general that half of the population is dramatically underrepresented in the mentoring field. So, and not just in the mentoring field, but in other quote unquote caring professions such as education and others. So AMP conducted a bit of a study and a survey across Canada or across Alberta with some Canadian partners about this topic. And I believe they're producing a toolkit of different resources on recruitment, as well as they're doing some survey data as well too. So that's in conjunction with the University of Alberta. And I believe the findings will be shared within the next month or so. And you can find them, AMP will probably, AMP will share them with CMP, and we will be discussing it from there. So does that help, Veronique?
Yeah, that's perfect. I think that's a great example of how when we have an understanding of which group is needed and which group is not currently being reached with our recruitment strategies, we can dig a little deeper and try to develop new strategies and tools and resources to empower everyone to target that group and hopefully increase recruitment.
And this will be really interesting for us for this survey to make sure to be asking people so that we can then run that through our analysis at the end and sort of produce some specific kind of profiles depending on which groups might be of interest. I think on the next Mentimeter poll there, it's a bit of a word cloud. So if there are specific groups that you are interested in targeting as potential mentors, if you just type it in, then I think it's going to create this image that can show some areas of overlap. So for example, if you want to put in men or males, then we can see the different groups that are a priority for people. Or not, I'm not sure.
It's always daunting when it's a blank slate.
There we go. Here we go.
I think this is also really interesting, and we're going to give a very high-level overview of some of our findings from the youth survey that we thought might be relevant today, but just thinking about how different groups have different access to mentors, but also different levels of unmet need. So, yeah.
And this is what came up at that More Males Mentoring Research Day. It was one of the key findings was the need for market research. And Jody, who's on the call, spoke to this, the need for market research on how do we reach men, what messages appeal to them, what barriers are they facing, how can we help recruit them into mentoring. And just the same way, same thing when we're trying to get more underrepresented groups in mentoring, be it First Nations, newcomers, others. What are the messages that we can use to reach out to them? How do we help lead with the front line, as Dan said?
Okay. I mean, I could just sit and watch this all day.
Yeah, it's a beautiful work cloud, and we're seeing it evolve. And this is really interesting because it confirms some of the things we've already been discussing, and it adds a couple of components and things that we hadn't originally thought about. So thank you for shaping our thinking and helping us design a better survey.
Yeah, thank you. And just in the interest of time, I think we can move forward on to the next, although I hesitate to lose that. So the next is sort of about which region are you located in? Oh no, sorry.
Did I miss a slide, or is this the one?
No, that was just as kind of a follow-up. I see, like, for example, Jess in the chat did it where she specified like Nova Scotian communities. We thought for some specific subpopulations, it might be good to know what region you're in. So if you are trying to target a particular group and you're in a particular province or region, you could specify that in the chat box.
Thanks, Jennifer. I got thrown by the slide Mentimeter double duty, but yeah, so we're just really wanting to understand how and why your organization might be interested in information about informal mentoring.
I noticed that Dan actually kind of touched on this a bit too when he was saying, like, you might want to be interested in asking some of the youth that you work with, like, who they have those like kind of surface level relationships that could become more in depth with some more support or structure. So that kind of made me think of this question and informal mentoring and kind of like the relationship between formal and informal and what we can learn by collecting information on both.
Okay.
It's interesting, they're all tied there. The part of our motivation for asking this question was just because of how big of an emphasis the US survey put on asking questions about informal mentorship. So they really generated a lot of data on this topic. So it was interesting for us to hear from you about what information you might be looking for in that regard. Christina, are you there for this one?
Yeah, sorry, I thought you were saying well, this okay. In the Power of Relationships survey, the survey explored different subtopics of interest, and these were reflected in the questions asked and the way they analyzed and reported the findings from the study. So, yeah, interesting. We want to hear from you about, what information you're most interested in about. And again, if you don't see any of the, a subtopic that you are interested in reflected in the poll, please feel free to pop it in the chat box. So any other topics?
Tracy mentioned engaging new cultural mentors or mentees.
Yeah, it was the first 5 ones in there were pulled directly from the US survey. So it's interesting to see like the extent to which that is relevant in Canada in a different context, right?
Mm-hmm. We can move to, I think, the next.
Yeah. For this one, I apologize, Michael, but would it be possible to show the slide, specifically slide 31?
Yeah, just 1 second.
Okay, sorry.
Nope.
And if it's not 31, it's the one with the big kind of primary color blocks.
Yeah.
Is the profile, the personas?
Yeah.
The personas, yeah, because we had to renumber your slides by
sorry,
putting it in our master slide deck.
Yeah, so you just scroll down to the one that looks really colorful. There you go. Yeah.
Okay, I'm just gonna full screen this so it's readable. Tell us about the personas.
Yeah, the personas. So this is from the US study. They did a cluster analysis of all their participants, and they sort of grouped them according to their involvement in structured mentoring. And so they created these 4 personas for each group. So they had the active mentor, the mentor advocate, a naive mentor, or a mentor rejecter. So an active mentor is like currently highly engaged. A mentor advocate is not currently mentoring, but is supportive. A naive mentor is unsure how to get involved. They might have limited current involvement, but they're sort of on the fringe. And then the mentor rejecter is not interested and not supportive. So they created these personas, and then they did a lot of work with their analysis to actually show their personal characteristics, like their age and gender, motivating factors, general beliefs about youth and society. So they had kind of like a profile for each of these 4 different categories. And we were just curious now to go back to the Mentimeter poll to ask you if this is something that would be of interest to you to do these types of profiles, and then which of the 4 kind of groups would you be most interested in, like understanding or unpacking, like who they are and what their motivations are.
Right, and I think that the goal for Mentor was to understand which demographics and characteristics certain groups or organizations might want to target when they're looking at increasing a person's involvement from being from being supportive to being active, or from being naive to becoming supportive. So I think that was a big goal here. It's the same thing that marketing firms do, or research or website development firms do. They try to understand who are the users, what are the characteristics, and how that can be used to reach them.
And we posted the different, I saw that it was difficult to read, so we posted the different definitions of the personas in the chat box in English. Oh.
So could we skip to the next poll there? Because it seems like there is sort of a general interest in recreating this to some extent with our analysis. But of those 4 groups, I'm kind of curious which ones people feel like they need to know the most about, or the extent to which like someone's a mystery to you and you want to really understand who they are and where they're coming from with their beliefs and their motivations.
Steve mentioned the personas are very interesting. However, be cautious not to generalize, which is certainly true. Another way that the personas can be helpful is in terms of targeted advertising on social media. If we're advertising to certain demographics or characteristics, or say fans of Gordon Lightfoot, or people who like particular politicians or something like that, based on the personas, that can give us insight into building audiences and those sorts of characteristics.
It's interesting to see the interest in knowing. I mean, I'm interested in knowing more about mentor rejectors as well, but it's interesting to see the level of interest.
And it makes sense too from a marketing and recruitment strategy.
Yeah.
Right? This is not where you're going to invest your time and your money, because it's very unlikely to yield any results. So understanding who not to target is almost as important as to understanding who is a good audience and who could be convinced to step up.
So this question is really about the level of data that would be useful for your organization. So imagine you're having to make an important decision about recruiting and retaining mentors for your program or your organization. What kind of data would you be willing to rely on to inform your decision making? Yeah. Yeah, and if you have any comments about this, please pop them in the chat box.
And this is something we're highly aware of, that we know mentoring recruitment strategies that work in, say, downtown Toronto may not be as helpful in rural Saskatchewan, Manitoba, Alberta. So we're trying to think as the Canadian Mentoring Partnership, and this leads into that whole communities of practice and mastermind group about how do we create messages that work for different regions that are consistent but also unique.
Yeah. And geographic differences may not be the only consideration, obviously. There may be communities in opposite areas of the country that share a lot of similarities or not. So just thinking about the types of communities and levels of data that would be helpful to learn from.
The religiosity piece was really interesting in the American study, and we know that Mentor, there's many successful programs that have helped to recruit from faith organizations to mentoring programs and to provide that partnership.
So Christina, I'm not sure, in the interest of time, should we switch to the next poll on the definitions, or do you want to go through the early findings?
I think we can switch to the poll, and then if there's time at the end, maybe just share some reflections about some of the findings. But this is going to be maybe a bit of a juggle, but I think that Véronique, are both the English and French definitions in the chat box, or just the?
I can put them there. They're not, the French ones are there.
Mm-hmm.
I'll have all of them together, so that I'll start with those and I'll put the English ones after.
Okay, thanks, Michael. So the first is just sort of asking about our definitions related to formal and informal mentoring. And so if there are ways that you've defined formal and informal mentoring that are slightly different, or any suggestions that you have, please feel free to make those recommendations or get in touch with us later. Okay. Or any thoughts about them? Okay, and then I think we can probably go to the next. So this is related to the definition of a mentoring program versus service. When thinking about connecting with service providing organizations. So how do you differentiate, sort of a mentoring program versus programs or services that have an element of mentoring, but the mentoring is not the end goal. And again, any suggestions to improve the differentiation between these or improve the definitions, please feel free to weigh in the chat box.
I think the last one, the slide that defines mentor. Yeah, I think it was up by the definitions, or sorry, the one before that slide, actually just one up from that one. There, yeah. So we were curious if anybody had any thoughts on the mentor term specifically, and for those of you that do have formal mentoring programs, how do you explain the difference between a mentor and other people who may support youth in their life? So this is kind of this juggling act with some of the definitions that we want to be really inclusive and have like a broad understanding of who a mentor could be, but we also want to be specific enough that we can actually differentiate between a mentor and someone else, because a mentor is not everybody. So any insights on that conundrum that we're facing would be appreciated.
So I see we've recorded almost all the feedback in the Mentimeter polls then. Christina, would you like to, I see we only have about 4 minutes left.
Yeah.
Would you or Vero like to sneak preview what any other aspects, or do we have what we need from the Mentimeter? Yes.
Thank you so much for all your input. It's been hugely helpful, and we really appreciate your participation in this. As Dan mentioned, like, the front line is really critical. I think the only other thing we would invite you to share, and it's similar to something we asked earlier, is if you have any recruitment and retention success stories or things that have really worked well for your organization. feel free again to sort of put those in the chat box in the last few moments that we have, because we know that, you know, there's a lot of really innovative and excellent practices out there, and so we really want to hear from you all who are experts in connecting. And so, yeah, that would be great if you could put those in the chat box. But again, really thank you so much for your time, and we really want to create a survey that produces information that helps you. So thank you. I don't know, Veronique, if you have anything to add.
No, I think this is very helpful. And again, while we develop a survey, when we're developing our reports and our knowledge mobilization strategy, your input is invaluable. We can't pretend to know everything about your realities or understand 100% exactly what will be helpful and actionable for you. So this is why we try to engage you along the way, and this is why we're really grateful for the time you've taken to help us and inform the development of this survey. I can copy again the link to the US report, but it is incredibly rich, and I think it has a potential of being very helpful for Canadian mentoring organizations as well. And I mean, the goal is really to increase recruitment and make sure that we're also recruiting the right mentors, because I think that's one of the findings of our youth survey, is that certain demographics have high access to mentors, but it doesn't seem to be exactly the right mentors for them. I don't know if you want to speak to that, Christina, or add anything, but.
No, I mean, I think in forthcoming reports and information from the CMP, you know, we'll have some findings from the youth survey, and some early results are telling us that that barriers to accessing a mentor for certain groups and unmet needs are really actually in some ways more felt for those who have access to a mentor. And so it's really about, as Veronique said, having the right mentor. And so matching the needs of young people with the right mentors. And also interesting is sort of the diverse barriers that young people face when accessing a mentor. The number one response was not knowing how to find a mentor. So it's going to be, you know, it'll be interesting to, I guess, bring all of these different perspectives together to really help with the recruitment and retention of mentors, but actually ultimately as well getting out to youth. So yeah.
Right, and to get
Awesome.
all of those three pieces, we need your help. So again, our surveys, all of us are very, very eager to get as many responses as possible. So please help us make that happen.
Yeah. Well, thank you to all of you who joined us today. Thank you especially to our presenters, to Daniel Horgan, to SRDC, the team, Christina and Jennifer. It was fantastic and informative, and I hope that all of our audience has both some thoughts now on the tactics, on the strategies, and on the future audience development that we're going to be doing in terms of helping more people start mentoring across Canada. Again, please visit mentoringcanada.ca/stateofmentoring. As well, on mentoringcanada.ca, you can sign up for our newsletter. When we have the slides available and translated, that's where we'll be sharing them. They'll be coming out in our newsletter. So sign up to learn more. Again, thank you so much for joining. We're out of time. If you have other questions, I'm just going to get Vero to post her email in the chat box. Please reach out to her. She will help you connect with what you need for the surveys or for any of these pieces. Stay tuned for more exciting news in our newsletter, for future webinars and everything else. Thank you again to everyone. Have a wonderful day and a great afternoon. And hashtag keep mentoring.